Welcome to Recalibrate Reality, the future of New York. I'm Scott Rechler, Chair of the Regional Plan Association and CEO and Chair of RXR. Working with the 92nd Street Y, we've launched a new conversational series where leading thinkers and decision makers seek to answer the question, how do we recalibrate reality to create a better and brighter future for New York? This is a first in a series of conversations about the future of New York in a post-COVID world. And there is no one better to kick off this series than the Chief Executive for the state of New York, Governor Andrew Cuomo. Governor Cuomo has been New York's leader since he was elected governor in 2011, but at no other point has his leadership been more critical than with COVID-19. We've watched the governor and his team operate in real time through the COVID fog of war. And now, with the vaccine, we're finally starting to see light at the end of the tunnel. And so, let's recalibrate reality with Governor Andrew Cuomo. Governor Cuomo, welcome to Recalibrate Reality, the future of New York. I really appreciate you taking the time to be here today. You know, I can't believe it's almost a year since we began this battle against COVID. I know for me personally, I can't remember a more intense time. So I only can imagine what it must be for you. So before we jump into this conversation, I'd like to say, how you doing? How you holding up? How you staying so energized through this?
Well, first, Scott, thank you. Thank you for all you're doing in this. Thank you for the civic involvement, what you're doing on a personal level, a professional level, and thank you for this series because it is smart. We do have to understand what's going on, and we do have to plan what's going on. I really believe at this point, our future is what we make it. You know that expression? It's never been more true. The future belongs to the state, the county, the region, the country that best recalibrates reality. Because reality has changed. You used an expression that caught my ear at a previous time when we were together, when you said there's been 10 months of change and retrospection almost daily. There's been a rate of change in society that we really have to appreciate and understand. So thank you, thank the RPA, thank the 92nd Street Y. How am I doing? I'm tired. It's been 347 days, but, we do what we have to do, right? You rise to the occasion. We do what we have to do, but relative to our experience, yes, it's been testing and trying.
Right. Well, listen, we're with you. And actually, that's part of what I'm trying to do. We're trying to do with this conversational series, which is, as you and I have had the conversation in the past, it feels like that since COVID, there's been a void in the business, the cultural, the civic communities all coming together to tackle our state, our region's challenges like we've done in the past when we've had other crises. So the purpose of this show is to bring together leaders from the arts, the civic, cultural institutions, business community, restaurants, across the spectrums on a weekly basis to hear their insights as to what's happening and how do we recalibrate reality for a post-COVID world. And there's no better person to start with this conversations than you, someone who's literally been writing a new playbook for us to work our way through and how we can rebuild back better and stronger in a post-COVID world. So thank you for doing this again.
My pleasure. But Scott, I think you're right. First of all, it's a matter of timing, right? I used to work in the federal government on emergency management. You'd fly into a place where a hurricane was about to hit. Before you do the damage assessment, you have to let the hurricane pass. First is just help people during the hurricane. When the hurricane passes, then you do a damage assessment. How do we rebuild after COVID? Well, let the hurricane pass first, right? And let's see what's still standing. Now, I think the bulk of the hurricane has passed. We're still losing people every day. We still have a while to go. But we know the basic parameters of the damage. So I think now you can start an intelligent conversation about, let's take an assessment of the damage and what happened, and then where do we go from here?
Now that makes a lot of sense. And I think, as you think about it from the here and now, it's starting to feel like there is light at the end of the tunnel, particularly with the vaccine. I know there's been a lot of challenges with getting supply. No one expects it to happen overnight, but what do you think the time frame is for the vaccine to hit the critical mass for the new normal to get us to that point?
Look, I do believe the previous federal federal administration, this was their parting gift. They did mess up the production of the vaccine. Operation Warp Speed in the Trump administration, if you remember, they gave billions of dollars to drug companies to expedite the vaccine. Great. But the vaccine is only as good as the vaccine production, and we don't have the vaccine production. Now, the Biden administration has been in for a few weeks, literally. But it is a supply problem of the vaccine, and it's an incredible foul-up. In the last days of the Trump administration, they opened the eligibility. So you had nursing homes, nurses, doctors, essential workers, 65 plus. In New York, that's about 10 million people. We get 300,000 doses per week. The mayhem is 10 million people chasing 300,000 doses every week. So it is all about that supply. Now, we have a whole distribution chain set up, and pharmacies and small mass vaccination sites, large mass vaccination sites, but it is supply. And the federal government under Biden has been increasing that supply slowly. In about 3 weeks, they've raised it about 28%. If Johnson & Johnson is approved, that would be the first major surge. But if you look at the trajectory now, I think you're talking about an upward trajectory overall through May, June. May, June, the vaccine should start to hit critical mass. The production should increase. Pfizer will up their production. Moderna will up their production. Another number of other drug companies will up their production. And I think May, June, July, some will say September, you'll really hit critical mass on the vaccine. But that is the light at the end of the tunnel because the vaccine works. We have the infection stable now. The vaccine kicks in. That'll bring the infection rate down. The only asterisk to the entire conversation is unless a variant causes mayhem. What does that mean? Unless a South Africa variant, a UK variant, a variant of a variant, because this virus mutates constantly. Yep. Unless one variant comes out that is resistant to the vaccine. That's the caveat that we should keep an eye on. But absent that, I think you're looking at June to September as a range for the vaccine to hit critical mass. And what I'm trying to do in New York is accelerate the reopening, not waiting for that point, using testing. And look, on the reopening of the economy, it's all balance, right? Life is balance. Yep. We're going to reopen the large arenas. We did a demonstration in the Buffalo Bills playoff game. 7,000 people were in the stadium, all tested before they went into the stadium. First football game in the country to test people going into the stadium. We'll start to open up the large arenas with the testing first. And I want to continue to do this. You could open theaters with testing. You could open restaurants to a higher percentage with testing. So I think the testing and rapid testing is the key to accelerating the reopening because we can't sit here until June, July, August, September. We just can't.
Yeah, and to that point, just to think about things, and you made the reference earlier, my comment about that we saw with COVID, sort of we had 10 years of new innovation adoption in 10 months. And when you think about how that has changed society, right? I always use the Netflix and Blockbuster scenario, right? We knew Blockbuster wasn't going to be around for a long time, but over a 10-year period, a Blockbuster would go out of business, a CVS would take the store, they'd hire the people, and eventually Blockbuster was gone and totally, and Netflix was there. That now has happened in this 10 months to a year. And, our systems of government and policies and programs, really were never built to have that level of disruption and dislocation so quickly. And so, one thing that concerns me, and I'm curious on your take, is there's going to be large swaths of the economy, small businesses, local businesses, essential workers that, are now displaced. And even though we may have an overall economic recovery from a macro basis, so when you look below the line, these people aren't going to necessarily have, jobs or the training for the jobs. How are we equipped as a government at the state level and the federal level to try to address that problem?
Yeah, good point. Let's separate two issues if we can. Let's separate government response to a medical emergency, government public health response. Especially federal government gets a C- in response to this. You had no PPE. We couldn't find ventilators. There was no surge plan for hospitals. We have no real operational public health capacity. You couldn't do health screenings at airports. Your point is then there's a second category on how do you adjust to these dramatic changes that were really coincident with COVID. It has nothing to do with the virus, but the virus accelerated social business changes across the board that I don't even know that we were fully comprehended. We talk about what Zoom did, but Zoom is just the surface. You said to society, the workplace is no longer preeminent. It is now acceptable to do business like this. And everybody can now do business like this. I was talking to a partner in a big law firm. He said to me, if I called up a client and he said, I can't come to your office, I can't come to a meeting, I can't go to your son's wedding, I can't take you to lunch in a fancy restaurant, I would be fired. But all of that now changed. The way lawyers do business, accountants do business, the arts do business, it's all changed. Yep. And what does this mean now? And will people go back? And to what extent will they go back? And what is it going to take them to go back? And then what are the ripples and the ramifications of these major changes? What is urban? I was HUD secretary. I started assistant secretary for community planning and development. What is a city, the future of a city, when it does not necessitate a daily commute of workers to come in who then frequent the retail stores and the restaurants, etc.? How much of a reduction can an urban environment handle? And what does that do to the revenue of the urban environment? And can you still, do you have a critical mass to handle the stores, etc.? This is all uncharted territory. And you're right, this normally would have taken 10 years to happen. And it happened in 10 months. And assessing it, what are the consequences of it? Can we attenuate some of the consequences? And then how do we address those consequences that we can't attenuate? That all has to happen now and quickly.
Yeah, and I think, two things that come to mind as you're speaking about that. One is from a policy perspective, we need bold policies, right? You got to take new plays out of a new playbook for a post-COVID world and accelerate this. And so, example in my mind is a policy you put forward in terms of thinking about some of the hotels that are oversupplied or the old office buildings that are going to be empty, and accelerating the ability for over the next 5 years to convert them to housing where we have a housing shortage, right? Because it's going to happen over time. But if they sit vacant, you're going to basically have vacant buildings, vacant blocks, which then means the restaurants aren't having customers, local businesses aren't having customers. But the other point I would say is from a civic standpoint, right? And this is a part that has frustrated me a little bit, which is that we all need to take responsibility. The business people, the people that live here need to realize that if you don't come back to your community, your downtowns, because you have the luxury to be someplace else, you're actually impacting the future prosperity of that community, of your community. And so it's almost there should have a sense of civic obligation to recognize that you need to be there supporting it. And then the business leaders like us, we have to think about restaurants. We have to be thinking about those local stores that add to the character of those communities as what makes our communities great, right? It's what gives it a way of life that people want to be there and not a rental stream. And so we need to now reimagine structures where we're partnering with them, and it's not about them paying us rent. It's about getting them open, getting them vibrant again, and then cutting a deal that if they're profitable in the future, that we then figure out what's fair at that point. But that's, we need to reimagine and reinvent at all levels, I believe.
Oh, you're so right. And look, what you just talked about, the transition for business, the business community. This is a conversation we have to engage in, because it's not a business calculus, right? The business calculus is, I'm going to rent that space for what I can get economically, and if I'm not going to make enough money, I'm not going to rent that space. Okay, now there's a new calculus. Having an urban environment is a community asset, a metropolitan asset. Yes, you can stay in your house in the Hamptons or in the Hudson Valley or wherever you want to be. But what cities do for you is they're places of creative synergies. That's the place of music. That's the place of theater. That's the place of history. That's the place of cuisine. That is an art form in and of itself. And cities are a laboratory for those art forms. And you don't want to lose that, because that's an asset for all of us. Yes, you can live in the Hamptons, and you can Zoom from the Hamptons, and you can do work that way. But there's more to life than sitting in a home and Zooming to work, right? There's friends, there's stimulation, there's arts, there's culture, there's music that makes us who we are. And that is all in the urban environment. And we have to understand that that urban environment is going to change. And we have to be part of the solution for those urban environments.
Yeah, there's no doubt. It's this interconnected ecosystem that creates a magnetic quality of life that makes cities vibrant, right? And that's what we've had, and we got to get back to that. And for those who think it's just going to return to what it was and are holding out, they're just going to go through a slow, painful obsolescence and eventually be forced to get to the same solution anyway. So trying to accelerate it, I think, is key. But another piece of this ecosystem that you have been particularly focused on for years now is infrastructure, and how important infrastructure is to our region and to our city. And I don't think many people, particularly outside of New York, or even the people that, particularly as we've been staying at home through the pandemic, realize how much has been accomplished on the infrastructure front. And I had a phone call recently with someone that flew into LaGuardia Airport, got off the plane, and he was on his iPhone just sending a text, and looked up in the terminal and thought he landed in the wrong airport because LaGuardia was so beautiful and he couldn't remember it being like this, right? So, I don't think people really understand how much has been done in New York. Could you take a minute and maybe just share, sort of as you think through all the projects that are in our pipeline, what that looks like, 3 to 5 years from now, so that people understand, how cutting edge New York is going to be on that front?
Well, to me, that is the light at the end of the tunnel. When people say I'm nervous about New York, and by the way, they're nervous about New York. You talk to the people in LA, they're nervous about LA, they're nervous about Chicago, they're nervous about Rome, they're nervous about Paris, right? The COVID made density a frightening thing. There was a reason people left cities and went to more rural, suburban communities, because they were afraid of the density. They didn't want to be on a bus, they didn't want to be on a crowded street, they were afraid of the virus, which is understandable. You alleviate the concern with the virus, the density itself won't be as frightening. But it's also, and this is what I was saying before, it is up to us. And New York did not just evolve. New York was built strategically and dramatically and with ambition. And we were always ahead of the curve. So we want to say COVID is going to change the market and the market forces. Fine. Anticipate them, figure them out, and get there first. We're building, and we accelerated it during COVID. And I'll tell you a funny story. An entirely new transportation network for New York that will lead the nation. We start COVID, and the construction companies, we're doing everything about COVID, and all the construction companies that were doing the project say, well, I guess we'll put these all on hold. I said, no. This is actually the best time to build, because the traffic is down, the volume is down, the traffic on the subways is down, roads are down, people need work. Now is the time when government builds. Any economist will tell you, you look at the economic cycles, We talked about FDR and the New Deal. The economy is slow, private economy is slow, government economy, public sector work comes in to bolster that economy. And it does something else. It bolsters the spirit. Yes, FDR was raising buildings from the ground. FDR was more raising spirits of people. He knew that every time a new building went up and somebody said, oh, look at that, that's new, that hasn't been there before, there was a sense of optimism that developed. And that's what FDR was doing in the New Deal. You land at that new LaGuardia, which was accelerated during COVID. And it's the first new airport in 25 years. And it went from, frankly, an embarrassing experience to what is going to be a world-class airport at LaGuardia. JFK transformation, $13 billion. It's going to be a world-class experience. That Moynihan train station is so beautiful. We have people going to visit the Moynihan train station as if it was an art gallery. And I was talking to the managers of the train station, and they said, oh yeah, we have a lot of people coming. I said, and they're traveling where? They said, they're not traveling. They're just coming to see the art in Moynihan and the architecture. It is that beautiful. Airports, rail, new rail coming in from the Long Island Railroad. Long Island, the commute, you can't drive in on the LIE anymore, right? We're battling Zoom. I'm not going to spend 2.5 hours in a car driving in from Nassau anymore. Okay, the Long Island Railroad has a new third rail. We have new cars. It's a totally different commuting experience. Coming into a new Penn Station, and we're going to rebuild an entirely new Penn Station, add 80% more track capacity so you can get more trains in and mass transit actually works. 2nd Avenue subway now goes to 96th Street, opened up that whole corridor when we extended it, now going up to 125th Street. Train coming in directly from LaGuardia Airport, so you don't have to get in a cab. You land in the plane, you get in the train to New York City. This is going to be a totally different experience of New York City. We're redoing more work on the subway system than ever done before. All new station enhancements going for the Long Island Railroad and for Metro North. So it's a really quality experience. This is all new. Your point about taking the commercial that will be vacant and converting it to housing and affordable housing to get that young talent back to New York, which we were having a problem before the pandemic because the cost of housing was so high. I mean, you couldn't move, I'm a Queens boy. You couldn't even get an apartment in Queens or Brooklyn as a young person and afford the rent. We're going to have excess commercial. That's good news, lemons into lemonade. Let's have more affordable housing to get that young talent back. You can afford to live here, and you're a dreamer, you're going to be an artist, you're going to be a sculptor, you're going to be the next great newscaster. God bless you. Come here, and you can afford to live here. So there are major dynamics and factors already at work that will really show a different side of New York. And I believe show an optimism. People don't believe that government has capacity anymore. They don't believe in government competence. Don't worry, we have a plan. Yeah, I worry when government says that because I don't believe they have a plan. And if they have a plan, I don't believe the plan is right. And if they have a plan that happens to be right, I don't believe they can actually do it. I think New Yorkers now are feeling confidence. We can do this. Go look at Moynihan Station, tell me if we can do it. Go look at the Mayoral Cuomo Bridge across the Hudson River. $5 billion, the largest infrastructure project in the United States of America, on time, on budget, and beautiful. So we are blessed with a team in New York that can make these things happen. And if people know that this can work, Their confidence is up. Their optimism is up. I see a future. They will buy in. And that's what we need desperately now.
Yeah.
It's been a long year. I'm depressed. I don't know what to do. I've been walking around the house in my bathrobe. I only put on a shirt to do Zooms. Okay, but there is a bright future. And New York is resilient. And the way we came back after 9/11 and went from the trade centers to a Freedom Tower, we're doing that all across the state. And they will see it, Scott. It's not that they need to believe a speech from the governor.
Exactly.
They will see it and touch it, and there will be nothing like that to boost the spirit.
Yeah, and the other thing I think it does is it actually instills confidence in companies to invest in New York, right? When we're thinking about companies that say, I wanted to be in New York because this is where the talent is, and when they see the state investing in this type of infrastructure, companies like the Googles, the Facebooks, the Amazons, the JP Morgans, the Pfizers, the Disneys that are building these big campuses in New York are making commitments to New York for decades to come, because to your point, this is where they believe the talent will be. And if we weren't making these investments in infrastructure and that quality of life, they wouldn't have that conviction to make investments in our city and bring that talent back here. So I think you're 100% correct. And it's really, frankly, it's going to be the bridge, in my opinion, that's going to get us to the other side of this COVID crisis, where we're living in this fog of war, where people haven't necessarily been out of their homes. They haven't seen this. They haven't been interacting. This is going to be the bridge that's going to get us there.
Yeah, we are still in the fog of war, by the way. I believe that's very true.
Yes.
And when we were saying before, you have to let the hurricane pass before you can do the assessment. We are still in that fog, period. But I think what you said is exactly right, Scott. Those companies that came here, they didn't come here just because they liked the New York accent. They came here because the talent was here, and they need the talent. These businesses are a function of the young minds and the young talent. And you're not going to get the young talent to sit in a retirement community in another part of the country and put on sunscreen. They want to be here because they're young and they're stimulated and it's exciting. And the companies follow the talent, right? The fish follow the bait. The big companies follow the talent.
The other thing I think on your point on infrastructure, just to follow that through, is that, particularly in this environment, there's going to be more of a regional approach, right? And some of the challenges we faced before in terms of congestion, capacity on our transit systems, and affordability of housing, you can solve if you look through a regional lens. And putting in things, infrastructure like the third rail on the Long Island Railroad or the East Side Access, we're making that connectivity that much better. And when people can work remotely a day or two a week, they're going to go further out, and they're going to be willing to go to the Westchester and parts of Long Island where they can afford more affordable housing and quality of life, and then come into the city when they need to be in the city. So these are you're planting seeds for a post-COVID world that plays into what the new post-COVID reality is going to be. And I think it's critical that we're all thinking through that lens.
Well, this is where the RPA and the Regional Plan Association and their orientation is so smart. You're right. Look, will the same percentage of people come into work 5 days a week? I don't believe it. I believe Zoom has changed the rules. And shown people a different lifestyle, and they like it, right? But yes, I'll stay in the house during COVID because, frankly, I'm afraid to go into a restaurant. I'm afraid to go into a wedding. But post-COVID, I want to get out of the house. This is nice. Spending a lot of time with the kids, that's nice. But I want to get out of the house. I want to go to a museum. I want to have a conversation with some other people. I want to have a meal with my colleagues. I want to see what's going on. I want to see a play. I want to see Broadway. I want the stimulation of the city. Okay, now is that 2 days a week? Is that 3 days a week? Is it 4 days a week? I think for young people, it is still going to be a 5 days a week.
Yep.
I think young people, almost like us, but a little younger than us, I think they're going to say, no, I want the city 5 days a week. I think just if I had to prioritize, and I'd love the RPA to think about this, we get the young people back. I think that brings so much more energy to New York.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So speaking of local governments, in New York City, we have another campaign coming up for the new mayor of New York City. The primaries in June, obviously, that in New York, that leads to who the mayor is. When you think as people are thinking about considering their choice for mayor, what advice would you give them in terms of what they should be thinking about in making that selection? I think there's like 30 candidates running right now. What should they be looking at?
I would say first, Scott, first, learn from the past experience. Second, stop disrespecting the politics and the political office. There's this attitude that, well, anyone can do politics. Anyone can be mayor. It's just politics. That is so wrong-headed and so disrespectful of public service. If you're going to hire a plumber, you want to make sure the plumber is licensed and certified and knows how to do his job. You're going to get in an airplane, you want to know that the pilot is trained and certified. But anyone can be mayor, anyone can be president, anyone can be governor. It doesn't take any expertise whatsoever. Yeah, it did. And you learn that through COVID because the incompetent ones failed. They just failed. And we have to get smarter about selections and take them more seriously. There is a skill set required. You're hiring a person, understand the job description. You're hiring a manager of New York. A mayor is a manager, right? He has to run a $90 billion corporation. What is your management experience, sir? Oh, I've never managed anything. I have a staff of 6 people. Oh, you have a staff of 6 people, and you're going to now run one of the largest corporations in the United States of America, and you had no management experience. How do you think that is going to work?
Yeah, and 2 takeaways from that are important. I think one is that the responsibility of being good citizens also falls on us, right? We need to actually go out and vote, which we've been, I think, as community, woefully irresponsible of not only not having that job interviewing, but exercising our right to vote. And then, once we don't vote, I don't think you really have the right to start, yelling at that elected official for not liking the job they did because you didn't actually, exercise your right to vote for that person, to hire that person along the way. And if you look at how some of the mayors have been elected, they've been elected with very, very small amounts of votes in the past. So getting people out to vote, I think, is critical. And the second point you raised, which is the slogans, the 2-word slogans, these are complicated issues. They're complex, and no one likes to deal with complexity. And one of the things that we've been hoping to do with this conversational series is to have longer conversations and digging into some of these more complex issues with thoughtful insights and approaches to them, rather than just the slogans that are more ideological in nature, but not necessarily focused on the policies that help the people. So I appreciate those two points there.
Let me make one other quick follow-up. One quick follow-up. You want to talk about not an informed discussion on the New York City mayoral race? You're a few months from the election. One of the pressing issues is crime in New York City. And it's not just crime in New York City. It's a dysfunctional relationship between the police and the community. Not novel to New York, it's a national problem. But the protest, distrust by many members of the community against the NYPD. That relationship does not work unless there's trust and reciprocity. And you can feel it from the NYPD, who have their argument, their concerns about the chokehold law, the diaphragm law, the lack of respect, and you have it from the community. What are you doing to resolve that? And what mayoral candidate are your plans to resolve that? I forced the conversation on the state side. I said every city that has a police force in the state, 500, must have a collaborative convene, I said this last year, and have a new public safety plan passed by April 1 when we do the state budget. Otherwise, you're not going to get any state funding. Now, all the local officials said, oh, that's a hot potato. I don't want to get near it, the police and the community. I said, I know it's a hot potato. That's why you have to go near it, right? Because you need to have a functioning public safety system. You want to talk about bringing back New York City. No one is going to bring back New York City if they think they may be walking down a block and a homeless person may hit them over the head with a brick, right? You hear stories from people saying, I'm afraid to walk around New York City. I haven't heard that since the 60s and the 70s, right? What is their plan to address it? There's no discussion. I said to one of the civic organizations the other day, I said, why don't you have a debate, mayoral debate just on safety and how do you fix the police and community relationship? What's your plan to do that? Because without public safety, none of this works. But it's just not a smart conversation. It's also important for young people. I say this to my daughters and their friends all the time. Don't tell me who has the cute slogan and who, looks like they're going to be the radical departure. Who has the experience, the wisdom, the ideas to actually do it? My father used to say, we don't need ideas that sound good. We need ideas that are good and sound. It's a little cumbersome, but it's true. Don't give me your simplistic platitudes that are never going to be implemented and then just disillusion everyone. Give me real ideas that are thought out, where you thought out their consequences, and tell me how you're going to do it, and tell me you have the skill set to do it.
I think having those extreme positions and those slogans just create divisiveness, and they don't create solutions that are the good for the most. And then usually they're the ones that are coming from a few very vocal activists that have their own agenda that they're pushing either on the left or the right, and not necessarily focus on the people that live in those communities. So that's a good point. Listen, you raised your father, right? And I wanted to just touch upon this because both of us in many ways have continued in the family business, you in politics, me in real estate. And I think both of us were taught ultimately our mission is about building stronger, more equitable communities. It's in our blood. It energizes us. And in Judaism, they call it tikkun olam, which means to literally repair the world, right? And I think I was brought up that way, and you were brought up that way. And last March, when COVID hit, I realized that early on those days that business would never be the same, life would never be the same, things were going to change, and I found myself thinking a lot about what my dad would do. And what kind of advice he would give me to get through this. And I'm curious, as you've been going through COVID, have you had the voice of your father in your head and things that he might be saying to you to help guide you through these difficult days?
Yeah. He would be saying, my father, tikkun olam, reach out, fill the abyss, tzedakah, charity, but even more justice. Tzedakah is justice, social justice. I talked to him many nights because this is a situation I wouldn't want anyone else to ever have to go through in life. People dying every day, every expert telling you there's nothing that can be done. And it's just you at the end of the day. I have a great team and they have been magnificent. But somebody has to make the decision, and I make the decision, for better or for worse. So there were many nights when I talked to my father, because I could talk. He was my best friend also. And he was so smart and so right in so many things. So there were many nights I talked to him, and I knew him so well, I knew what he would say in response, because his analysis was always basically the same. But I would have this little exercise that I would have the conversation with him. I knew what he was going to ask in analyzing the fact pattern. And it was an exercise that I would use to go through it. And it would help my thought process. It would also calm me. And he also had he was so secure, Scott, in himself and in his own skin, that the bottom line was always, if you are doing the right thing, it doesn't matter what anyone else says. If you feel in your gut that you're doing the right thing, that's all that matters. And if you don't feel like you're doing the right thing, then nothing else matters either, right? It's totally binary. So that's liberating in some way. Make the best decision you can. They like it, they love it, they throw rocks at you. It doesn't matter. And that's what guided me, and his voice helped me. And I really believe that he was with me all through it. I believe he would be proud of what we did. I think he would have been really disappointed with the Trump administration. I don't know that he would have been as tolerant as I was with the Trump administration. I bit my tongue in many times because I really thought maybe if I'm try to be nice, that there'll be some reasonableness on the other side, although it never happened. But I think he helped me and he guided me, and I think he'd be proud at the end of the day.
Yeah,
and that makes me feel good.
Yeah.
It makes me feel good.
No, I'm sure he would be, and I know your voice to so many people around the country during this COVID crisis was that voice of comfort. I mean, I know I've gotten phone calls during the crisis that people were getting up early from the West Coast to watch your briefings, and my mom would call me, she's watching your briefings. So we're fortunate to have had your leadership guide us through that crisis and that fog of war, as we've discussed, and now as we're getting ready to depart that fog and start, thinking about how we're going to recalibrate reality for a better, more equitable New York, to have your leadership and you at the helm. And I thank you so much for that and for being here today for this conversation.
Well, that's the next chapter, Scott, is the rebuilding chapter. Hurricane passes, save as many lives as you can. Hurricane leaves, assess the damage, start to rebuild. Chapter 2. We'll do it.
We'll do it.
We'll do it together.
We'll do it together. Thank you, Governor. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Scott. Thanks for having me.
That concludes our first episode of Recalibrate Reality, the future of New York. As you just heard, the COVID hurricane is starting to pass. Now, we need to assess the damage and then start to rebuild. We can't use a playbook from the world that once was, but instead, we need a new playbook for a post-COVID world that imagines a better and brighter future for all New Yorkers. I believe that we can create such a world, but only by working together. Thank you again to Governor Andrew Cuomo. Thank you to the 92nd Street Y and the Regional Plan Association. And thank you to the team for making this week's episode possible. I'm Scott Rechler from 75 Rockefeller Plaza in New York. See you next week.